Thank you so much indeed. As you heard, I'm from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, and I do not work on the kind of topics that you are interested in, but the issues that we do cover, they will touch upon it very much. So I think we will have a very fruitful discussion later on. It is, of course, a huge honor to be invited to this conference and once again to see beautiful, but I have to say very sad Berlin. Please, during my presentation today and tomorrow, do not interrupt me, but use paper and pen and take down all important comments and questions and save them for the questions and answer sessions. Furthermore, it's very important that you do not trust me. Do not make up your mind based upon what I say today. Use your own critical thinking, and I'm already very impressed by the two previous presentations. They definitely have used their critical thinking. You need to ponder, contemplate, think more, think again, think. And then, based upon that information you have, decide for yourself and for your family. Also, I will only present peer-review-based scientific publications, and I will try to translate their results to your current situation and your current life. It's very interesting for me to look back on my own life. I was born completely naive. I thought for a number of years when I was a child and a teenager and a young man that the whole world was actually very good, especially if we talked about the American world, and it was very bad, especially if we talked about the world represented by Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, East Germany, and so on. And if someone would have said that, for instance, Volkswagen would attempt to fool the entire world, I would have laughed. No way that Volkswagen in Germany could do anything like that. If someone would have said that American presidents would spy inside their own country, creating the Watergate scandal, I would have laughed completely. If someone had said that your own Prime Minister, Olof Palme, will be killed in a very, very mysterious and odd way, I wouldn't have believed them. If someone would have mentioned the NSA and people like Ed Snowden, Julian Assange, Bradley Manning, and WikiLeaks, I would have shook my head and said, no way, people are not doing things such as that. If someone would have mentioned the Wakefield whistleblower William F. Thompson or the World Health Organization pandemic scandal, I wouldn't have believed them. Today, I know very differently. Today, I must say, I'm a little bit shocked when I look around in the world. And as we all witness, and you are really the experts, I'm a small sparrow compared to you eagles and falcons. But as we all witness, something is badly rotten, not only inside the state of Denmark, but inside the entire world. However, this may sound very pessimistic, and I'm not. I'm extremely optimistic. I see the power inside you, for instance, but also inside the consumers. And don't forget that most things in the world actually are on the rise. For instance, the life expectancy has increased by 41% since 1950. The average IQ scores keep rising. The share of people living in absolute poverty has been halved since 1981, and literacy has increased to nearly 83% since 1810 up to 2010. So there is a dramatic increase, and as we discussed in the coffee break, it's not a new world order, but it's a nice world order. However, be careful, there could be backsides even to these very optimistic figures. And I agree, if there is anything as a mind control going on, and you have to remember, I come from the Department of Neuroscience, which hosts the biggest brain project in the world, the Human Brain Project, which has received €1 billion, an enormous sum of money to build a model of the human brain for reasons that are not openly declared. And also the same department doing experiments to manipulate the brain to get people to think that they, for instance, have an extra arm. But there are other forms of mind control, and the previous speaker so very elegantly put out all these in front of us, like political propaganda, commercial PR, what I call lies, more lies, and statistics. And these are all harassments, but not in a covert form. And as he also said so very interestingly, if there is a possibility to turn anything into a weapon, people will do it. I'm of course not I'm not an expert on mind control at all, so you have to bear with me if I say things that are wrong or off the grid really. But I see that citizens nowadays, they have a value as consumers. When we are retired, for instance, then people in political or economical power very much lose interest in us. And I would say we are all enslaved in a monetary system for good and for worse. And some years ago I was in the European Union meeting some of the parliament members, and then I realized that the European Union, they are actually only afraid of one thing in the world, and that's not the military equipment or anything like that. The only thing they're really afraid of is the power of the consumers. The moment this room is filled with more than, should we say, 100, 150 people, and instead 100 and 150 million people standing up saying no, then all of the issues we are talking about will end. And I think that's really one of the most important issues to be discussed, and the previous speakers, they touched upon that too. How should we inform the general public? How should we get them to start thinking? And here in Germany, you had a, should we say, philosopher who said this: how fortunate for governments that the people they administer don't think. Do you remember who it was that said that? A German statesman, philosopher, and going to war man, Adolf Hitler. So that's really the point. We need to activate the general public, the consumers, not to only live in the nice part of the world, but also in a part of the world where it's okay to question. With this very short introduction, I will turn then to the images I will show, and I hope it will work. I will first describe a general background, and I will start with this. Gentlemen, don't let hard work kill your wife. Let electricity do it. This is actually a psychological test. It tests an audience if they have a normal sense of humor or a so-called sick sense of humor, and I saw some had one and some had the others. But of course, all these companies producing all these gadgets, they do it for greed and profit. They don't want to harm us in any way. A dead consumer is a very bad consumer. They don't want to kill us or anything like it. But they want us to constantly go to the shops and consume more and more and more. And as you know, today, if you buy a vacuum cleaner, it will be default in a few years. Old vacuum cleaners, they just went on and on and on. So there are built-in mistakes so that things should crack and we need to buy more all the time. But it's keeping the wheels running until someone, and you are too few, says no. We have to educate more and more people to stand up and say no more of this. And I could tell you, such movements are moving right now, so there is hope. And as a French philosopher once said, Professor Froissart at the French Academy, he said that since politicians have never used their mental powers, there is still hope for mankind. If we talk about health effects, very early it was found out that the introduction of electricity, that certain persons actually started to claim adverse health effects. And if you compare these anecdotal reports, they very much indicate that they were some form of electro-hypersensitive people. And this was further strengthened by the introduction of amateur radio in the 1950s. Then more and more people said that they got health effects. And of course, no one believed them, but they were reported in the literature. The really big breakthrough is in 1979 when Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper published a study connecting childhood leukemia with electromagnetic fields from power lines. And that arose an enormous interest. And by the year 2001, the World Health Organization actually cancer classified so-called power-frequent magnetic fields, which is a long term for household electricity, in its association with childhood leukemia, and it's still cancer classified as such. Well, then I will jump to the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity. For people that are old as I am, we used to call functionally impaired persons handicapped. And then we switched to the word disabled, but nowadays we should use the modern term functionally impaired. And it's very interesting thinking about what I hear from you. When I meet persons with electrohypersensitivity, sometimes I get an odd, or should we say creepy feeling that they are actually under some kind of affection, affliction, control. You can use different words here. There is an outer source that are causing their health problems. It's not generally, but maybe pointed towards them. But it's just a gut feeling. Well, in Sweden, electrohypersensitivity is completely recognized as a functional impairment. This is very important to realize. It's not a disease. They do not have a diagnosis. They are not treated. It's the environment that is treated with quotation marks. And the treatment, as you will see later on, is an accessibility measure. However, the symptoms were also recognized and classified the very same year, 2000, as an occupationally related symptom-based diagnosis. So if you're electrohypersensitive, you can go to your doctor and get aspirin for your headache, and you can get sick leave, which is paid by the state if your symptoms are too severe. But still, the culprit is only the environment. They have their own handicap organization called the Swedish Association for the Electrohypersensitive, and they are included in the Swedish Disability Federation. And Swedish municipalities which deal with this, and historically that's also indeed very interesting, because you know all that this goes back to the atrocities done to people with handicaps before and during the Second World War. And after the Second World War, the Allied countries said no more again. So they removed the responsibility from the county councils and the physicians and gave it to municipalities and civil servants, which was really marking that the doctors had failed badly. And I know during this conference we will hear more about that. These municipalities, they followed the so-called standard rules, but since 2007 they are upgraded into the UN Convention on Human Rights for Persons with Functional Impairments. I already heard that you have ideas, and I think they are very good ideas, to produce a similar human rights convention for people that are targeted in some way. And you just need to produce hardcore data and results and proofs. And in the first lecture today, we heard that it's easy, it's cheap, and we can produce gadgets making, for instance, judges fall asleep. That's exactly what you should do. That will be a very winning mark from your side. People with the functional impairment electrohypersensitivity are entitled to have what we all are entitled to have, namely an equal life in a society based on equality. And the way to achieve that is by complete accessibility. And therefore, as you can see here in Berlin and in Sweden, we are building a huge number of wheelchair ramps, kneeling buses, automatic sliding doors, phased-off sidewalks, etc. And the important consequence of this, which, for instance, the United Nations have realized, is that the winners is anyone, everyone. Everyone will use the phased-off sidewalk, having a bicycle or a baby pram or a shopping cart. So anyone would benefit from it. And if we would make society completely accessible for people with electrohypersensitivity, maybe then fewer children will get childhood leukemia. So it could be a complete win-win situation. In Sweden and, everywhere, every member state of the United Nations will look upon functionally impaired persons in this way. No human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. Thus, it is the environment that should be treated. And the basis for this has been drawn from a number of documents, including the Swedish Action Plan, and it has a very interesting subtitle, which is at the last in green, From Patient to Citizen, it says. So before, people very often looked upon handicapped persons or functionally impaired persons as being patients, but they are not. They are citizens. And by the way, few people realize that when you go to a medical doctor, you are not a patient by definition, you are still a person. Patient is only a person that is under medical treatment. The moment before and after, they are just citizens, persons, to be remembered. I see very often when I meet persons coming to the medical health care that the moment they step through the door, their posture changes. From being a person, they become a patient. Don't do that. Remember to always be a person. And this has a lot of implications. My time is too short to go into all of this. But for instance, to force a person to quit one's employment or to move from one's home is a serious legal violation of the UN Convention. The things you report, proven or unproven, would fit into this category. And therefore a human rights question could be started and issued here. And the same, of course, goes for children. You are not allowed to discriminate them from their educational rights. Never. As you will see later on during my presentation, I said that the World Health Organization cancer classified power frequent magnetic fields in 2001. 2011 May 31st, they cancer classified radio frequent fields containing all microwaves for wireless telecommunication. And nowadays, in many countries like Sweden, England, Germany, and so on, concerned parents are asking themselves, how can the state force me to put my children into a wireless school with computers, e-readers, mobile phones, which will expose them to a possible cancerogenous exposure? So here are a lot of interesting thoughts for further debate. So in essence, persons with a functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, as you, as anyone, shall enjoy their human rights. Nothing less, nothing more. So simple. And I shouldn't in any way exercise any thoughts above your head, but it's tempting to say that focus on one aim and run the whole track through. This could be such an aim. All the documents are already outlined. They're waiting for you to use them. It's nothing peculiar. All the form sheets are ready, waiting for you at the UN, at the European Human Rights Act, at local countries, etc., etc. Just an idea, a thought. Or maybe you don't agree. Just think for a moment, if your loved ones had electrohypersensitivity, what would you then want from your country? And I often say, do not ask what you can do for your country, ask instead what your country can do for you. Don't be afraid. Trust me, the psychopaths that we heard about, they are genuine. I meet them often, but there are very few. Most adults are normal human people. They have the same thoughts and ideas and worries, the same mortgages, etc. Children, love, happiness, understanding. They will communicate with you. Nearly 99.99% of the people I met in my career has been adults, period. Nothing more, nothing less. So just address them. I'm sure they will help you, but you need to address them in a correct way, if you see what I mean. Having said this, I'm very worried and very concerned in Sweden. I just outlined that Sweden, for an electrohypersensitive person, is heaven on earth, right? But this year, 2015, there has been enormous attacks on the electrohypersensitive community from physicians, from medical doctors. The attacks have been done off, but they're still working on it. And they're addressing the UN, the World Health Organization, and the message is, no, the persons here are not functionally impaired. It's nothing wrong in the environment. It's inside them. They are patients. They should have a diagnosis and a diagnosis code. And some of the physicians wants to send the persons with electrohypersensitivity to psychologists and psychiatrists, not doing anything to the exposure in the environment. This is bad news, I could tell you. I've been fighting, but unfortunately I feel very lonely in this fight. There are very few people supporting it. And I can only do the best I can. You know, when I die and I come to St. Peter, I don't want St. Peter to say to me, Olle, why didn't you speak up? I mean, you saw it coming. I want him to say, you did your very best. You failed, but it's not your fault, you know. You did your very best.
You did not fail, though.
Unfortunately, thank you so much, but I often go to my bed with my wife and our 5 cats, and I feel that I have failed because, you know, the movement from these medical doctors and the political establishment and so on is sometimes like an avalanche. It's a tsunami, and sometimes I see it's a tsunami of pure evil. They're not psychopaths. They're not thinking what they're doing. And I try to tell them, put yourself into this situation. Would you really like to be treated that way then? And of course they don't want that, but that's another story. Well, I will very quickly give you some results from science, and I shouldn't take too much time on this, but we have tried for many, many years, actually decades, to investigate, and I'm so curious, if I had the money, I would like to investigate, for instance, the skin of targeted individuals to see if they have the same alterations. And for instance, when we looked at persons with electrohypersensitivity, and this is a picture from a microscope, you see up here the epidermis, down here the dermis of the human skin. These white cells, they are so-called dendritic cells. They react to radiation, like X-rays, alpha, beta, and gamma radiation, strong ultraviolet light, but we have not subjected them to this. It's just a background radiation from power lines, from computers, mobile phones, that kind of radiation. And they have an enormous activation of this outermost portion of their immune system. Many people with electrohypersensitivity, they claim that they feel they have an ongoing flu. They feel, very tight in their joints and it's aching and they have headaches and stuff like that. This is probably the cellular image of their symptoms. And also they have a very high increase, which I will show you later, of so-called mast cells, which contain substances such as histamine, heparin, also causing a lot of the symptoms that people with electrohypersensitivity report. And the funny thing is that when we expose them to an ordinary household television set, these cells that you see here before the exposure, after the exposure, have completely gone. Either they are there, but we cannot find them with the technique we use, or they actually left the skin. And talking with other colleagues who has done much more detailed work, the answer is no, they leave as a reaction to radiation. So even if people don't feel these movements in their skin and their organs, this is going on, and this is natural. This is exactly what happens to Scandinavians in the springtime when they go out on the lunchtime in the sun, which they haven't seen for months, and they stand there, then this will happen. So it's nothing peculiar, although I didn't quite realize it from the beginning. In another experimental setup, we have normal healthy volunteers. Here are people with electrohypersensitivity. You have epidermis, and of course then you have your clothes and the air out here, and then you have the dermis down here. And now each spot here is a so-called mast cell. And as you can see in the electrohypersensitive person's skin, the number has increased dramatically. The cells look brighter and bigger, and they are situated more superficially. And this is very interesting because in countries such as Sweden and also in Germany, etc., there has been a dramatic increase in asthma, allergies, and oversensitivities. And this cell type is the key cell for these. When I give lectures in Sweden, I always ask people if they think it's good that we have such a dramatic increase of asthmas and oversensitivities in Sweden. Children, for instance, up to the age of 14, more than 50% of Swedish children are asthmatic, allergic, oversensitive. And of course, no one says it's good. But the odd thing is that in Sweden, people save money using different papers in banks, bonds and so on, and they are placed in companies that are producing medicines to cure this asthma and allergy. So actually every Swede is involved without even realizing it. And that's another kind of debate. How should we address this entanglement into the economy? Everyone is entangled, often without realizing it at all. But of course, it's extremely bad, and for the whole Swedish population, all ages, it's more than 1/3 and it's pointing upwards, and you can just ask what's going on. Also, the number of electrohypersensitive people, they report various symptoms. They don't have all the symptoms in every person, but this is a collection of such symptoms. And the very interesting fact is that the mast cell on the previous image and its content of histamine can explain all the symptoms here. So it could be a very simple clue and explanation to why people report all these symptoms. Doctors very often say, oh, they are not specific in any way, anyone could have these symptoms. But that's not true at all. They are very specific for mast cells and for histamine, and then for radiation-induced alterations of these cells. And maybe the culprit is so simple that the radiation is causing all of this. And when people report various symptoms such as concentration difficulties, short-term memory decreases, headaches, etc., they are all to be found in this list or in similar lists. So it's not the imagination causing it, it's just the radiation from our modern society. In another experiment, we took normal, healthy volunteers, medical and dental students, and we put them in front of ordinary household television sets and ordinary household computer screens. And they sat there for 8 hours. They should report if they felt anything. And we exposed their backs at about 40 centimeters distance, which is a normal viewing distance. No student reported any odd things. A few of them said it was boring to sit with their back to computers and television sets for 8 hours. That was the only. But the very interesting thing was that when we took biopsies before the exposure started, and after 2 hours in this case, the number of mast cells in the skin again had increased without them feeling anything. Again, this is a classical effect of ionizing radiation like X-rays and radioactivity, but here we have non-ionizing radiation like microwaves, power-frequent magnetic fields and stuff like that. And still, the skin reacts. And that puts, of course, the question if in the long-term run, and I'm an advocate for that question, are we really playing with biology here? When we use all these fun gadgets, computers, wireless telephones and so on, are we actually jeopardizing human beings, other animals, plants, bacteria and so on? And from parallel experiments, people have shown that the immune system of humans, as well as experimental animals, as well as cell cultures, initially they react with an activation. The ionizing radiation from a mobile phone will stimulate the immune system to work better. But after some time they will peak and the immune system will deteriorate. And that could mean a lot. And of course it's scary from a scientific point of view, and as some of you already have witnessed about, the most scary thing for me personally is that when I ask, for instance, the Swedish government and parliament to send me all the documentation that clearly shows that this whole body exposure of human beings is completely safe, and I want them to send me that because I want to do other things. If it is safe, then I want to go to Africa instead and study Ebola or whatever. I don't want to waste my time on something that is shown to be safe. And so far, I have received nothing back. And this is also appalling, I would say, because I represent one of the most famous governmental authorities in the world, namely the Karolinska Institute. And it's obligatory in Sweden, even for governments and parliaments, to answer questions from authorities, and they don't do it. And that's scary. I don't know why, I don't understand, and in the meantime the number of papers each day is increasing and increasing, and has for a long time surpassed 25,000 peer-review-based scientific publications. So the knowledge is just enormous, but no one seems to take notice. Well, other scientists have also studied this, and for instance, a very famous Australian cell biologist showed that mast cells in cell culture, in small plastic vials, they don't like to use the Australian mobile phone frequency, 835 megahertz for GSM. And they react at very low exposure levels, and they react as if there would have been an allergic reaction. One of the mantras in science is that studies needs to be replicated, and when I show this to audiences around the world, often people say, well, you know, you cannot trust a single study. You need to replicate it. But this is the replication. So it has been replicated. And the question is, how many times do I have to tell you that we are in Berlin until you trust me? One time, two times? How many times? How many replications are we supposed to ask for until society reacts? And that's also up to you as consumers to decide. And no one else decides that actually, but you need to be a little bit more in number. I have a colleague in Japan. He has done some extremely interesting studies. He allowed atopic eczemas of the skin of patients to be exposed to mobile phone radiation, and to make a long story short, they didn't like it. The eczemas got worse, and he could also monitor that by drawing blood and checking markers in the peripheral blood, and they increase, such as substance P and vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, and they are markers for the severity of the disease. So you see, there are a number of situations where mast cells in Australia, Japanese eczema patients, they don't like to be exposed. And they are still always exposed. But things happen. Things that if I was the head of the government in Sweden, I would say, oh, hey, stop. This is not good. We cannot allow ourselves to play with all the human beings and all the rest of the biotope until we really can say this is safe. And no one reacts. Of course, and I know you are very often accused of just being nutcases. You imagine different things, you have dreamt up explanatory models, etc., etc. You are victims of mass media hysteria, and so on. But that's so easily solved. And the previous speaker showed the bull experiment, and here you can use rats. Rats don't read newspapers, they don't listen to radio, they don't watch television, they don't imagine themselves things. But when you expose them in well-controlled experiments, they do react in the very same way. So when it comes to health effects of electromagnetic fields, I don't believe very much in any psychology or psychiatry, and that's so easily taken care of in controlled experiments. I come back as a lunatic to what we heard before from you, namely to expose the judges and put them to sleep in a court of law. That's a very powerful demonstration. You should do that. And I would go 2 steps further. First, I would put them to sleep, wake them up. Then I would put them into agonizing pain and relieve them of pain. And then I would ask them, is it all right if I now kill you? And I trust they will say no. They will stand up and say, you are real, you are for real. So that's a very powerful experiment, you know. Should be done. Don't say I said that. Are you recording this? Sorry. Well, I would like to talk a little bit about the precautionary principle, which is within the European Union, the World Health Organization, the UN, etc., etc. And it's just one principle, and therefore it has big beginning letters here. And I would also like to talk about the bioinitiative report and to the Celoteon consensus agreement. There are so many things one can do. And I don't say that they are effective, but you need to do them. It's like if you want to play football, you cannot put skates on your feet. You cannot have two balls with you. There are laws that regulate the game of football. The only thing you need to do is to win the match. And by using the right footgear and the right number of balls, etc. And it's the same here. The legal machinery may feel that it's against you, but it's not. It's constructed to really support and help. But you need to fill on the right sheets in the right way and so on. I'm not talking about the psychopaths because they will not listen. But the rest of the adult population will. And I will also come back to that. You know, wireless telecommunication has been a very sweet piece of candy for Sweden, for Finland and a few other countries. We have gained an enormous wealth because of this, and we are still gaining. Telecommunication is big in Scandinavia and probably will be much bigger soon. But you know, I love candy, by the way. I love to go to the shop and buy candy, a big piece of different small pieces. But when you eat candy, you take one piece after the other. But at a point, it's a little bit too much, actually, you know. And you leave the rest of the bag, and it's a little bit too sweet. And that happened very early also here. And please, this is not rocket science. I may be employed by the Karolinska Institute and previously by the Royal Institute of Technology and so on, but anyone could think about this. Namely, people like myself started to write commentaries, debate articles in public media in Sweden and in other countries. We're allowed to do that. Sweden is a democracy, so we can do that. And I wrote articles saying how dangerous are mobile phones. And this is very early. This is from 1995. Most of you were not even born then. Well, most of you, not all of you. No. And I put some very simple, non-rocket science questions. Unfortunately, these questions are still unanswered. And they are so simple. They don't take billions like the Human Brain Project. They take much less. They are simple to do, very much along the lines we heard before, to construct key experiments. But we have seen through the years that we are not allowed to address this. And for me, again, being sort of an amateur philosopher, I find that strange. If these things, gadgets, equipments, technologies are 100% safe, then it must be 100% safe to allow Olle Johansson to investigate that. Because there's only one Rome. All roads lead to Rome. I will arrive at the same conclusion. Is it safe? Then I will find it. But we are not allowed to investigate it. And for me, it's my life's biggest enigma. Well, not the biggest, maybe the second biggest, but still, it's a huge enigma. Why are we not allowed to investigate it? We have still tried, and we have done a few studies, but we could have done much more. And already in 1983, I coined an expression that many people use. I said, this is the largest full-scale experiment ever. What happens when we, 24 hours around the clock, wherever we are, allow ourselves and our children to be used as guinea pigs, whole body irradiated for the rest of our lives? And I have repeated the question, 85, 89, blah, 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 99, 2000, 2001, 2006, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I never get any answer. I told you shouldn't trust me. I have got answers. I'm just lying to you. I will give you a few of the answers. Operators and manufacturers do not, please stress that word, do not take any form of legal liability or responsibility for their products. Insurance companies around the world, including the big ones like Reassurance in Switzerland, Lloyd's in the UK, do not assure for any damage from electromagnetic fields. The World Health Organization, through their cancer classification, has pointed to that there is a problem. The measuring body has stepped backwards at the conference in London and said, no, you cannot use these measurements for protection. They have nothing to do with biology, they're just technical. The radiation protection boards have done the same. So that means on the ship that we call our home country, the state, all the captains and the crew has abandoned ship. You are left alone with all future liability issues. So if your kid gets cancer, you are very alone, I can tell you. So that is a very telling answer to my question. And it goes back at least 15 years. It has been over and over and over again publicly announced. No one is hiding this. And still, the consumers are not reacting. Well, a few are. A few concerned parents, a few activists, campaigners, etc. But there are very, very few. Again, being an amateur philosopher, it's odd to me to find that the safe thing is completely unsafe to, for instance, reassure in the insurance system. And you have to remember the insurance companies, they insure for a lot of things that are very, very, very unlikely. They want to earn money. And they have declared at the conference 2004 in London that for them it's not a question if all this non-ionizing radiation will cause harm, it's just a question who will pay for it, and they will not. And therefore, at the current liability, processes, legal processes in the United States, the manufacturers, the operators, the insurance companies are not put at stake. Instead, the American state is at the other end. And they are the ones that are now being chased by lawyers in brain tumor cases, etc. Because it's the last to be left. When the ship, the state, goes under, then there is nothing left at all. Well, some people, they do take things into their own hands. This is an example from Northern Ireland. And the story goes shortly like this. There was a group of people that protested against the plans of the municipality to build a very huge telecom mast. The municipality still built it. The citizens got really angry and they tore it down. You see it just lying on the ground. It's a huge mass construction. And the municipality also received an anonymous letter saying that if you ever build this mast again close to our schools and homes, we will kill you. And you know, in Northern Ireland, that can mean IRA or the Ulster Union. So they didn't build it again. This is not the way we should do things. But I could sense and understand the desperation in these parents and citizens having a municipality never listening to them. And at one point they just cracked and said, what the hell, we take it down, and so they did. I mean, we have an elected responsibility system. We should go to our civil servants and get the help and support we want. But here, something went wrong. And as you saw, that was from March 8, 2003. Since then, similar cases like this has happened elsewhere. Probably the most scary thing, not probably, the most scary thing for me as a scientist is that non-ionizing radiofrequent waves that are used for microwave communication, they are genotoxic. That has been proven so many times, so I've lost track of the number of replications. And it has been decided that, for instance, a pharmaceutical drug or a food item during development, if it shows genotoxic effects, those companies are not allowed to process the development further, manufacture or sell such a thing. Because a nightmare is to let loose a genotoxic effect in the population. But that doesn't apply to microwaves for wireless telecommunication. Again, scary, I must say. And it also affects fertility, immune system, the cancer defense, and so on. Just a simple experiment here, or a replication, because the industry said very early that they didn't believe in this. So they gave 12 laboratories in 7 European countries an enormous amount of money. Words have been said it was in the order of 100 million euros to replicate and show that the other scientists were wrong. There wasn't any genotoxic effect. But to make a long story short, when all these laboratories had done their homework with all this money, independent of each other, blah, 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 it turned out that Lai and Singh, the first investigators of this, they were right. And here you see an example. Here cells are exposed as an internal control to radioactivity, gamma irradiation, and this is equivalent to 1,600 chest X-rays. Few patients have come close to that kind of number, so it's a very strong radiation. And the image that is produced down here, and you see that from the normal state, and I'm sorry for the light here, but you see there is a tail, and it's because of the DNA being fragmented by the radiation, and the same tail is visible here. If we could lower the light, it will be very evident to you. And this is 24-hour mobile phone radiation at an exposure level that is officially okay. You should be able to withstand 2 watts per kilogram. So you have a dramatic genotoxic effect. And still these techniques are not questioned, or I would say stopped. They just continue exposing anyone, everyone, 24/7, wherever they are, whole body, including dogs, cats, goldfishes, insects, birds, bacteria, plants, etc. I do hope that the Swedish Parliament and government can come up with a document sending me to Africa instead, saying that this is safe because we have the proof here. So far, nothing. And to just summarize, other scientists are now as far as 100,000 times below the levels which are supposed to be safe for you. And still they see effects. For instance, at the cell proliferation and cell cycle, they see effects on the blood-brain barrier leakage. They see effects on the electric activity of the brain. They see these DNA effects, calcium fluxes, decrease in eating and drinking, etc., 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 etc. There are so many studies available nowadays clearly saying this is not good for you. I said that the insurance companies, the operators, the manufacturers, the World Health Organization, the Radiation Protection Boards and so on, they have listened. And they have done it officially and publicly, but the consumers haven't really reacted. But also others have listened, and that includes the municipality of Benevento in Italy. In 2006, they arranged a conference where they wanted to talk about, practically I would say, exposure guidelines. How much can we accept? And we wrote a resolution that is published in a peer-review-based scientific journal. You hear how boring I am. I never accept things that reach me via the internet or anything like that. It has to be officially scrutinized, checked, and published. And that's the only quality control I could judge, really. And that's important. Think about that. It's not very difficult, actually. It's quite simple to do this. And we wrote this resolution saying that we need, for instance, a comprehensive compilation of all the data available. We said that arguments that weak electromagnetic field exposure cannot affect biological systems do not represent the current spectrum of scientific opinion. We said that the precautionary principle must be used. We should inform the general public. We should limit cell phone use and cordless phone use to young children and teenagers. And we should ban telecom companies from marketing to them. And it turned out that no one jumped ahead and said that, well, we can do this compilation. So we had to do it ourselves. And that formed the Bioinitiative report. And it was publicly disseminated on August 31st, 2007. And we had then, for 9 months, put together more than 2,000 references on 600 pages. And there are no journals in the world that would publish such a thick document or report. So we had to violate our own rules. We had to publish it on the internet. After that, we have published parts of it in a peer-review-based scientific journal called Pathophysiology, and the report as such has been updated 2012 and 2014 and is today much more than twice the size it was from the beginning. And just to give you an idea, if you should print the report and all the containing references, it will form the pile of paper that is 5 meters high. So it's a huge compilation, clearly saying that the exposure guidelines are just not good, to say the least, and that also one needs to use biologically based public exposure standards instead of the technical ones. And you know, when you write a book on 600 pages, you don't think anyone will read it. And to our enormous surprise, the year after, September 4, 2008, it turned out that the European Parliament had done it. And they had arrived at the very same conclusion, that exposure standards, they were completely obsolete and did not protect for any exposure damage. And we were, wow, very happy. And we thought that now the European Union, with all its money, will give us the necessary resources to sit down and do the work for them. Because the Bioinitiative report, the reason why it was only 600 pages long was because after 9 months, having done it without any economical support at all, we just had to draw a line. We couldn't continue. And with money, I'm just dreaming how thick it would have come out. That's another story. So we thought, eventually we will get what we need. Do you know what happened? Well, the industry came forward and said, this is a very important result and this definitely needs to be done, but not this group of Bioinitiative workers. We, the industry, will do it for you. And so they did, and they arrived at the conclusion that nothing needs to be changed. Surprise, surprise. So we were completely lost and left out into the darkness. I said it was officially launched August 31st, 2007. The day after, when I came to my job, in my computer I had already 3 new publications that should have been in it. And it was decided early that it needed to be updated, and so it has been 2012 and 2014. And just to quickly show you some examples of the studies that came right after, for instance, scientists showed that cell phones decrease the sperm count, the motility, the viability, and normal morphology of male sperm cells. Not good at all, is it? Other studies showed that if you expose mice, they will end in irreversible infertility. If we translate that into the human level, that could mean that grandchildren in Berlin or elsewhere cannot get any babies in the future because of something we did now. It's a little bit too late to call backwards and say, hey, could you please stop exposing you? Because it will, generation after generation, affect the sperm cells, the egg cells, and their fertility rate. And here they ended in more or less complete infertility. Other scientists have shown that fetuses and also newly born babies, they get a stressed heart. When I ask parents, even parents working in the telecom industry, do you want your newly born baby to get a stressed heart? No one says, oh yeah, I want that. All parents say, hell no. But that's what happens when you expose fetuses and newlyborns to microwave radiation from wireless telecommunication. Others have shown effects on plants. This is a very famous study. Tomato plants were exposed to base station antenna radiation, and they reacted, and I will quote the French scientists who said, they reacted as if we had crushed them with a hammer. They didn't touch the plants. They just exposed them to base station radiation, and still the plant cells started to send a damaged sequence of molecules, including the classical damaged molecule calmodulin. So tomato plants in France, mast cells in Australia, and sperm cells all over the world, they evidently do not like this whole body experiment, and no one reacts. Also, rats are affected, and they show a retarded learning. And that has formed the basis for a current debate, together with this paper, where boys were subjected in a controlled double-blind exposure to microwaves from mobile phones, and the boys did less good in different language tests. And at least in Sweden, I thought we are supposed to produce the best children and teenagers who can compete on the global market with kids from Germany, China, United States, Brazil, India, Pakistan. But evidently something is going wrong here, and as you know, in the official PISA tests that evaluate different skills like math, language skills, Swedish kids have really plummeted in quality. And when it was recently remade, checking for their skills in IT and computer software knowledge, Sweden being the most computerized school country in the world, still they have plummeted in their knowledge. Swedish kids are getting dumber and dumber. And maybe, again, if I was the head of the government, I would say, this is not good. Should we really continue to expose kids in schools? Why don't we do it the old-fashioned ways with books and chalks and boards and so on, until we can say that it was all right? Well, I'm coming to a closure soon, and I hope you wave if I draw over my time. But we met again, a group in Norway in 2009 in November at Seletun outside of Bergen, and we realized that the European Parliament, they can point at persons and say, hey, you read 600 pages until next week. Most cannot do that. So they need a much shorter version of the bioinitiative report. And we produced a statement called the Selectune Statement, and where we pointed out that the current exposure guidelines were completely obsolete and that they did not take into account any form of prolonged low intensity measures. Few people know that a mobile phone which you buy had been tested on a fluid-filled plastic doll. Not even Swedes are fluid-filled plastic dolls. And you are only allowed to use your mobile phone one time in your life for 6 minutes at the most. Then you have to throw it away, because otherwise the guidelines are not working for you. This is official, you can read about it, but few people realize this. And therefore we said we need to produce biologically based public exposure guidelines. And that was published in 2010, and if anyone in the future would like to read one of the 25,000 or more scientific papers, I would recommend to start with that one. It's 8-9 pages long, and it's very down to sort of the basics. What should we do? How should we react? What kind of claims to our governments and health authorities? Well, after 2010, the Council of Europe in May 6 said that ban mobile phones and wireless networks in schools. As I said before, the last of May 2011, the World Health Organization, with its cancer authority, the International Association for Research on Cancer, classified radiofrequent electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic. 2012, October 12, the Italian Supreme Court ruled in favor that a mobile phone had caused a brain tumor, and you cannot go higher than that in Italy. So that stands really. And in January 29 this year, France adopted a law about wireless systems in schools. And now we are here, October 1 and 2 in Berlin, Germany, and maybe the answer is no more full-scale experimentation. But it's up to you as consumers to ask for it. I have to remind you, when I was in Luxembourg in the European Union and met these commissioner and parliament members, they told me, you can never again talk about this that you just did, namely that the only real power is or are the consumers. Because that will tip European Union over. The moment the consumer says no to something, that's the end. Because the consumers are the only one that actually hold power. Just to give you an example, in Sweden it has been calculated that much more than 90% of all the economical wealth is contained within 400 families. And there are 10 million Swedes approximately. The moment the other 10 million says no more, the power of these families is of course gone, and another society could be invented. And I don't know how that will look like, but we have experts here from Alaska, so he can tell you, of course. And finally, do not ever believe that mobile phones and wireless internet and similar gadgets are safe. They are not. They interfere with normal brain function, learning and memory, fertility, cancer risks, and been shown to shatter the DNA in cells. All of this can be found in peer-review-based scientific journals, but until now has not been in the public domain. And a very interesting sort of sideline was a few years ago, I read a paper and there were experts in studies on DNA. They had nothing to do with the kind of issues we're talking about now, but they were using chemicals to chop DNA into smaller pieces. And that's a very crude way to treat DNA. So they looked for a non-invasive tool that wouldn't interfere so dramatically with the DNA molecule, and then they found a mobile phone. So that's what they used to shatter DNA in their biological experiments. and no one reacts to what the heck is going on. This tool is not in a laboratory only, it's used by nearly everyone everywhere. What's the cost and price at the very end? And before leaving you, I just want to end by putting a little emphasis on safety. As you can see here, the public exposure guidelines currently here in Europe, here in the United States, is in the order of 9 million or 10 million microwatts per square meter. And I'm the only scientist, to the best of my knowledge, who has ever proposed that we should have a hygienic safety level. And I've said already in 1997 that only the normal biological background, the natural background, is such. And the background here in Berlin, for instance, if we remove the wireless gadgets, is in this order. And if you divide this by this, then you achieve the answer to the question I put to audiences when I lecture. I ask them, how much more radiation of the third generation mobile phone type is your body affected by today than like for 10 years ago? Is it 2 times as much or 3 times? And the leader so far was an old gentleman who said, no, it's much more, it's 100 times more. But the answer is a quintillion times more. That's a 1 with 18 zeros after. And for me, being a scientist in the medical and biological field, I mean, just to imagine, I said I'm a small sparrow. Just imagine tomorrow that the small German sparrow has increased its voice strength a quintillion times. Of Berlin would be no more, just the rubble of gravel again. It's just impossible to even imagine these increases. But you are sitting in it right now. It, as someone said, it's penetrating every wall, every ceiling, every floor, and so on. You are swimming into this avalanche of radiation, and someone needs to start putting more questions. Thank you so much indeed. It's a great honor.